Mr. Mgojo, thank you so much for making time for us. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, so this B20 presidency is, of course, a great opportunity for us to shape the global economic policy. What specific policy areas do you believe Africa is now perfectly positioned to influence most strongly?
Well, there's not one singular one. As you will have heard, that there were 8 task forces that were put together. They span from various areas, from trade to finance, to digital, to industrialization, to human capital development. So there's a number of areas of which various policy recommendations with initiatives for each of those task forces were being proposed with KPIs, and so that we are able to track whatever we have put together, so that we can able to measure the delivery to ensure that we are successful in achieving the desired goals. So what we are trying to do here is ensure that we come up with recommendations that will actually create a rebirth. I call it a rebirth of Africa as being the continent which really is going to be the economic driving force going into the future. So it is about unlocking all the things required to enable that to happen. And as I indicated, they span across these various 8 task forces. They talk to in making sure that we've got the infrastructure in place. We've got the capital required, that the cost of capital is also commensurate with the risk profile, the right risk profile of Africa, to ensure that the monies and the investment that's going to come into Africa is such that it will enable various projects to be undertaken, but in a much more fair way in terms of the cost of capital to enable that to be achieved.
Yeah, and when you look at the G20 countries, I mean, they control about 85% of the global GDP. How do we ensure that, African priorities are not diluted in such a powerful global platform? Well,
remember, within the B20, all those G20 countries, business sectors are actually CEOs, are party to the formulation of these recommendations. So the co-chairs are representative of all the G20 countries. So we have been the architects with our global business partners in formulating these recommendations, and hence why the recommendations are undertaken in such a manner and specified in such a manner that we actually have those KPIs, so that as it moves from one B20 to the next B20 country, we are basically going to be saying those policies that and those recommendations, which may take a number of years to implement, that they continue being implemented as it moves from one G20 to another G20. And we are all have come together to shape that those policies.
How do you think Africa can balance being a global supplier of critical minerals with the need for local beneficiation and industrialization? Because often we focus on what we're able to export, but how does it benefit us?
That is the essence of the recommendations. It actually defines how we will now transition from being a continent that simply extract resources and just export the resources, to the whole area around industrialization. Hence why we talk about the need to have the right capital, to also have the right policies, uniform policies across the countries that's going to allow the trade to enable in a much more cohesive and much more frictionless manner to stimulate that type of trade. But it also talks to the fact that we need to industrialize, we need to beneficiate at local so that we can able to sell the final product. Those are all encapsulated in the recommendations, and it defines how that we should go about to actually create that environment.
What about the African Continental Free Trade
Agreement?
Agreement?
Well, it's actually, that's the heart of it, by the way. Because for Africa, for it to be the biggest trading bloc, which it will become if we get this right. Because remember, 1 in 4 young people in the future by 2050 will be coming from Africa. So Africa has got the youngest population going forward, and therefore there's a big source of market that can be created out of Africa, a big source of market that can actually enable even those countries which are actually having old populations going into the future, like Europe, like Asian countries. They have got an aging population. So Africa, with its young population, creates an opportunity that if we have skilled correctly, we enable digital connectivity, we enable everything that is going to actually stimulate entrepreneurship. That's where the future really becomes. And that's why there's such an attraction in terms of looking at Africa now as the new frontier.
Yeah, because in the past, you talk about Africa having the youngest population. The market has always been there, but it's almost like we haven't really taken full advantage of this African continental.
Well, that's why it's so important that in this presidency, that this B20 is not a South Africa B20, it's an Africa B20, where we are the co-architects of how the engagement and the rules of engagement are being shaped for the future. That's going to also benefit Africa, because if you benefit Africa, you're actually benefiting the rest of the world, because this is where the growth is going to come from. Yeah.
What innovation do you think we can leverage for the country or even the continent from the B20 South Africa? I do remember with India, they used their B20 presidency to roll out digital payment systems for street vendors, etc., etc. What is the opportunity that exists for us in as far as innovation is concerned?
No, there's a number of them. I mean, they come in terms of different sectors. Okay, so there's not one big innovation, but what is going to be important is the digital infrastructure that's going to be required to enable for the continent to be able to get onto the internet. Because without that connectivity, you cannot have fintech, you can have entrepreneurship in fintech or other forms of development where digital connectivity is very important. So that it becomes one of the biggest backbones that we have to make sure that there's that connectivity throughout Africa.
How confident are you that these meetings will present progress on jobs? And let me ask it this way. Sometimes South Africans feel G20 is something that's too far removed from their reality, high-level conversations. But the question they're asking themselves is, how do they benefit? And at what point do they start seeing the benefits of this thing we're making a big deal of?
Well, if you look at the recommendations themselves, there's a big part of these recommendations in each of these various task force that looks at the SMME market, sector, that sector where now whether you're talking about finance, whether you're talking about trade access to markets, it talks to how do we enable and unlock the SMME sector so that's where the real growth comes from. That sector is the one that employs the most number of people. And so already, if you just look at some of the structural reforms that are beginning to take place, even in our own country, there's a big focus to say, if we can get electricity right, if we can get transport and logistics right, if we can deal with issues of other things like crime and corruption and also other infrastructure, then what you are able to do, and you start making sure that the policies that are being put in place are conducive to actually enable investment and attract investment. And then that's where the money starts getting spent and that's when the jobs gets created. But also that's when now you also start focusing on that market and that SME market in terms of the capital that can be made available and the skilling that can be made available then that becomes now the really growth engine. The recommendations actually focus on, that's why we're saying that we need those KPIs. Each of these recommendations, each of these initiatives have got a KPI to show how we progress in the next coming fund. And we can show year by year how we are progressing.
Okay. What sense have you gotten from your engagements with the business leaders from these G20 countries about South Africa as an investment destination? Are there specific, I mean, Eskom, as you said, there's some green shoots. Eskom has been getting things right recently over the last 2 years. Are there still some specific concerns they have that we need to address?
Just look at what has happened in the last while here in South Africa. we've got off the grey listing. What happened when that happened? There was a positive sign in terms of the attractiveness of South Africa. Because what the grey listing says is that we've done everything that was required of us to actually start dealing with illicit fund, that type of criminality that actually is very negative for the country. We have now, in the medium-term budget, we've seen that the targeting inflation target is 3%.
Yeah.
With that already, you see how even Standard & Poor, with all of those initiatives that are beginning to take place, the issue of power, load shedding is being addressed positively. The issue of transport and logistics and the reforms, we are seeing them happening. So there is already, you see that within how the market has reacted in terms of, and which necessitated now even Standard & Poor's to improve our credit rating, which reduces our cost of capital to actually now start funding the growth that we're going to require going into the future.
Okay, and that's working for us. So
it is beginning to work for
these
us.
Investors
it's very clear. It's very visible. It's very much in the market, and you see it in the bond rates, the positive reaction of the bond rates, which is really the cost of what it requires for the country to borrow capital. Those rates will also come down. So it is the work that has been done through the great partnership also between business and government to deal with all these issues around dealing with getting rid of load shedding, also the other reforms around transport and logistics I was talking about. Okay. So already those are actually happening on the ground.
All right, great. Let's hope these green shoots can be sustained and we can see the economy growing, jobs being created. Mxolisi Mgojo, thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you very much for the invite.